man lies strapped to a wooden frame, honey smeared across his face and limbs, while insects begin their work. This was not torture as improvisation, but as state doctrine, refined across centuries by an empire that turned the human body into a theater of absolute power. This is Persia, spanning roughly 550 BCE to 651 CE, a civilization that built roads, codified laws, and administered justice across 3 continents. But beneath the grandeur ran a current of calculated cruelty, punishments designed not merely to kill, but to erase identity, broadcast submission, and fuse spectacle with statecraft. What the Achaemenids, Parthians, and Sassanids left behind was not just conquest, but a vocabulary of suffering that blurred the line between punishment and performance. The method described at the opening was called Scaphism, though Greek sources gave it that name. Persian records remain silent, which itself tells a story about what empires choose to document. The condemned was placed between 2 narrow boats or hollowed logs, head and limbs protruding, then force-fed milk and honey until diarrhea set in. More honey coated the exposed skin. Insects, flies, wasps, beetles arrived within hours. The victim floated in their own waste as the swarm fed, laying eggs in the folds of skin, the eyes, the mouth. Death came in days, sometimes a week. The Greek historian Plutarch describes the execution of a soldier named Mithridates, accused of claiming credit for killing Cyrus the Younger in 401 BCE. 17 days, Plutarch writes, before the insects finished what the state began. Whether the account is literal or moralized propaganda, the image lodged itself in Western memory. Proof, perhaps, that the punishment achieved its goal even in the telling. But Scaphism was exceptional, reserved for regicide or the highest treason. Routine cruelty required less ceremony. Impalement became Persia's signature, inherited and perfected from Assyrian practice, but executed with an efficiency that marked the empire's bureaucratic reach. A sharpened stake, driven through the rectum or abdomen, positioned to avoid immediate organ failure. The condemned could survive hours, sometimes a day, hoisted above roads and city gates as a lesson in vertical geometry. When Darius the Thoughtful crushed the Babylonian revolt around 521 BCE, the Behistun inscription, carved into a cliff face in 3 languages, reports that he impaled 3,000 rebels. The number may be inflated, but the method was not. Impalement required no rare materials, no specialist executioners, no extended ritual. It scaled with empire. A single stake could be read from a distance, a grammar of power legible to the illiterate. The spectacle was the point. Executions in Persia were not hidden in dungeons, but staged in squares, at crossroads, near temples, where crowds gathered for commerce or prayer. The architecture of punishment shaped public space. Ctesias, a Greek physician at the Achaemenid court around him, 400 BCE, wrote of condemned prisoners paraded through Persepolis before execution, their crimes announced by heralds, their families sometimes forced to witness. The parade was as essential as the death. It transformed individual suffering into collective memory, the victim into a cautionary image burned into the minds of thousands. The crowd was never passive. Their presence completed the circuit of power. To watch was to participate, to internalize the message that the king's authority extended not just over land or law, but over flesh, breath, and the boundary between life and death. Yet not all punishment required blood. Mutilation preserved life while destroying status, a calculated subtraction that left the victim walking proof of royal displeasure. Blinding was common, especially for rivals to the throne or provincial governors suspected of ambition. Herodotus recounts that Xerxes blinded the son of Pythias after the father dared to request his eldest be spared from military service. The boy was executed, but the father was left alive, sightless, a monument to the cost of questioning royal will. Nose slitting, ear cropping, tongue removal, each injury carried social meaning. A man without a nose could not hold certain offices, could not testify in court, could not marry into elite families. The body became a text of disgrace, readable at a glance. The punishment was not finite. It extended into every future transaction, every negotiation of identity, until death. And then there were the punishments that erased without killing, that turned citizens into legal ghosts. Confiscation of property, forced resettlement, enslavement of entire families. These were administrative acts recorded in cuneiform on clay tablets with the same bureaucratic calm used to log grain shipments. When cities rebelled, the response was often not massacre but dispersal. Populations uprooted and scattered across the empire, their temples destroyed, their gods carried to Persia as hostages in stone. The Babylonian exile, though conducted by the Babylonians before Persian conquest, set a template that Persian rulers refined. Punishment became portable, unmoored from geography. You could survive and still lose everything: language, community, the ground your ancestors worked. The empire understood that identity was as vulnerable as flesh and far easier to unmake. The question of exaggeration hangs over all of this. Greek sources, Herodotus, Ctesias, Plutarch, wrote from outside, often hostile, eager to paint Persia as despotic and barbaric in contrast to Hellenic ideals. Scaphism appears in no Persian document. The numbers of the impaled may be symbolic rather than literal. But archaeology does not lie. Mass graves, execution sites, the remains of stakes in settlement layers near Persepolis. The spectacle was real, even if the details were polished by distance and bias. And the question is not whether every story is true, but why such stories became the dominant narrative. What kind of power benefits from a reputation for imaginative cruelty? The Persians may not have invented every method attributed to them, but they understood that fear, once seeded, does much of the empire's work. The legacy is this: punishment as theater, the body as political text, suffering as a tool of governance that transcended the moment of pain and became memory, mythology, warning. The Achaemenids built roads and wrote laws, but they also built a language of dominance in which the king's mercy was always provisional, always revocable, and the alternative was not swift death, but prolonged, public, and meticulously crafted agony. Later empires, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, borrowed the grammar, adapted the syntax, but the core lesson remained. Power that cannot be seen is power that can be questioned. So they made it visible, unforgettable, inscribed in wounds that outlasted the wound makers. Which method disturbs you more? The physical torture that ends in death, or the mutilation that forces the victim to carry their punishment through every remaining day of life?